Hello and welcome back to the Mist. I will be your wereraven today. Please stay with me as we navigate into our topic. If you wander off, I am not going to be held responsible for what you may encounter while we are in here. But what we are going to encounter as I guide you towards it is for us to finally talk about Ravenloft, Heir of Strahd, the newest D&D Ravenloft novel that came out like mid-May, so I'm a little late, but you're gonna be fine with it. We arrive when we're meant to arrive at a topic, and it wasn't because I procrastinated recording this. No. Oh, Dash is in the background. Okay, I tried to give one of the cats the opportunity to leave before I did this, and she chose not to take it. So if there's chaos behind me, we're embracing it. She's the danger that's within the mist, okay? That's Dash. That's Dash Cam. Trash little baby. Anyway, so like I said, this is the newest D&D novelization. It was written by Delilah S. Dawson, who I've not read any of her other works, but I've heard lots of great things, so I was really, really optimistic when I saw that this was announced. It's very similar to, there's, the Spelljammer one. They did the movie adaptation one when the D&D movie came out. It's very along the same vein. When they were talking about this one, this is, the only one I've seen, super well advertised for. And maybe this is, biasy of, the ads that I get. Pretty much on Instagram was where I saw it, knowing that, this would be something that I would be into, obviously. But I don't remember seeing, any of the other D&D novels that they've released over, the past few years be advertised anywhere. I only knew about them because I used to work in a bookstore. So they would come in and I would, perceive them with my own eyeballs and be like, oh, well, those are a thing. So they definitely put a lot more effort into putting this one out there. I didn't think about if I was going to hold this the whole time or this... Hey, that works. Okay. I was cautiously optimistic about it because I did listen to the Spelljammer one because it was on super cheap sale for the audio, and I thought it was just fine. It was generic, there was no depth to it, it was something to listen to while I was working, and I got the general gist that I felt like that was probably what most of the D&D novels were. So I was cautiously optimistic when I saw that Delilah Dawson was the author, and I didn't know if I was going to be super interested, and then I ended up pre-ordering it, because I was like, you know what, I gotta talk about it. I gotta read it, I gotta talk about it. I'm gonna get hyped for it. This is going to contain spoilers. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but here's your warning now. If you don't want spoilers for this novel, since it is new, it's only been out for a month, or if you don't want spoilers for Curse of Strahd in general, extended lore, the 5e campaign, you need to click away and come back to this, okay? You have to click away and come back to this. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but I'm covering my bases, okay? So no one can get mad at me. I told you what you were in for. If you continue forward with us into the mist, the encounter you will have will be spoilers and you will only have yourself to blame. I gave you your warning. I'm picking it back up. Alright, let's talk about the book itself, just physically, before we get to the contents. So, I honestly kind of like the cover, but I also kind of don't like the cover. There's something about it that makes me feel a little eh. However, what I didn't expect and wasn't aware of was this beautiful woman on the back, Dr. Victra Mordenheim. I love that bitch, because as soon as I saw her, I started speculating. I wanted to drop everything to start reading this book. Because she is the Dark Lord of Lamordia, if you were not aware. Lamordia is another domain of dread within Ravenloft, very similar to how Barovia is a domain of dread and Strahd is the Dark Lord. I didn't see anything about her being in it, involved, or there being other domains. I truly thought it was just going to be a Curse of Strahd campaign, but novelized, and obviously probably some twists that, aren't as written in the module. But then I saw her on the back cover and I got very, very intrigued. So I like the back more than I like the front. It's not bad. But this is what made me go, ooh, I need to know what's in this book, if that makes sense. Since I did pre-order it, I was able to put in the request for the signed nameplate from Delilah Dawson, and I do admit that I was a little whelmed by what I received. Oh, she wants out. Hold on, give me a second, let me let the baby out. Do you want freedom? Well, you can't paw to be let out and then run away. Dash, if you do not leave, you are my prisoner. There you go. I was warned ahead of time by someone who got the nameplate before I did, and I was whelmed by it. I was not necessarily surprised, considering how last minute to the publication date they announced that you could do this. So it's not like super personalized or pretty. It just, it's nice. I'm not gonna, it was a free thing if you pre-ordered the book that they sent you, but it's just a generic D&D sticker that has DS on it. Or, I keep thinking it's DS, but like it's obviously Delilah Dawson, whatever, her signature's on it, which is cool. But I thought that they would make it a little bit more personalized. It did come with a note from the publisher, Random House, which I thought was kind of cool. This is kind of what made up for the underwhelming nature of the signature, the nameplate, the sticker, what have you. They tried to make it like more personalized to what the book is about, which was what I was hoping for from the nameplate. It didn't happen, but again, free fun thing. Can't really knock it too much, you know what I mean? Alright, let's get into the meat and potatoes. The meat and potatoes. Probably unseasoned, because we are talking about Barovia. The plot of the book. So if you haven't read it, a general synopsis would be that Heir of Strahd is a novel in which a party is all lured into Barovia, which is, again, a separated demiplane. I assume if you're here, you know these things, but just to clarify. They awaken the dark twisted forest. They are kind of shoehorned into encounters that are dark and twisted, where they fight zombies, undead sort of thing. They're all strangers. They have to come together and figure out how to, get past their differences, trust one another, that sort of thing. They are invited to the castle by Count Strahd von Zarevich himself, where they go for dinner and then they stay. The castle's all tricksy and gothic horror and tearing them apart. The general vibe of what you think of when you think of Curse of Strahd campaign. I think I'm gonna start with the positives, and then we'll get into my critiques. Which, if you follow my TikTok, you've probably seen a lot of these comments, but they were a bit more spoiler-free. So some of this will be a little familiar to you guys. Generally, I think that this was a lot better than I was expecting from what I had learned to expect from what D&D novels are modern day. Delilah Dawson very clearly did some research. There was a lot of references in it that a dungeon master such as myself would find enjoyable and would remember from having to deep dive into the module and incorporate it into your plans. I'm gonna stop letting my camera shake. So that was very, very cool that it didn't feel half-assed. I would say that Delilah Dawson wrote it very well. The text wasn't boring to read. It very much captured the essence of what it feels like to have 5 people who don't know each other, 5 characters, come from different walks of life, get drawn into this dark and dreary, twisted world where things don't work the way that you're used to, and have to figure out how to navigate getting over any differences or pushing past any awkwardness of we don't know each other but we need trust. That was captured very, very well, I do believe. I truly did feel like it was low-level party people coming together. I enjoyed that a lot, getting to see that sort of thing. I did enjoy when they went to the castle. The attention to detail, again, all credit to the author, of the attention to detail of they actually had rooms from the map I would say vaguely laid out the way that they are on the map. I'll be honest, I'm not good at reading maps and remembering them entirely. But like I recognize the rooms and whatnot, so I'm not sure if the layout was exactly the same. I do think they altered that to make it make more sense for a novel, of course. But like that's not the end of the world. But like all like the little things that like are very clearly like Castle Ravenloft things that were in there, that was very like fun little Easter eggs, or if you already knew that those would be there. And then I feel like was very fun for readers who maybe weren't as aware of those little extra things. As I said earlier, because, you know, I mentioned how Dr. Victor of Mordenheim is on the back cover, and that intrigued me a lot, I was very excited that it wasn't just a Barovia-based Domain of Dread novel, that we did go somewhere else. Other Domains of Dread I'm so fascinated by so many of the other ones, but like I know that Barovia is the one that's like that's the big one. I mean, it's what started it all in the lore, and everyone loves a vampire. I get it, but I am so interested in other domains, hence why you can actually see it in the background. I have a stack of the old Ravenloft novels that give more lore and context to those other Domains of Dread. Obviously, they're a little outdated for lore-wise, given when they came out, but I'm so intrigued by them. And I love Dr. Victor Mordenheim because Lamordia, if you didn't know, is the domain of, like, snow and stitched flesh, so it's very much the steampunk, more scientific, Frankenstein-inspired domain. So it was very fun for them to tie those two together. And when I realized that they go to Lamordia, that was very, very exciting to get to see that be more described, especially some of the towns and the monsters that are there, and a few of like the big landmarks. It wasn't as in depth as I was hoping it would be, but I was still very excited to finally see another Domain of Dread get exposure in a way that I thought more of the general fan space would get to see, because I'm sure lots of people read this book because this is the first like new Ravenloft thing we've gotten in a hot minute, right? So that was very, very exciting to see that in there. I think I'm like 10 minutes in, and I'm already at the point where I don't think I have a whole lot of positive things to say. Before I get into my critiques, I just want to point out that you can enjoy something and critique it along the way. That is like my whole interaction with D&D in general, because of things that they have done in the past and, not corrected in the best ways. I did have a great time reading this book. This was the first book that like gripped me, and I read in a pretty quick manner. I usually take a while to get through books. I love reading, but like I'm a leisurely reader. I read slowly. But I think I finished this book in like less than a week. It was very, very fun. And I had a great time interacting with it critically and just being along for the ride. So I want to make sure that is very, very clear before we continue on for the rest of this video. So moving us along, flying right along into some of my critiques. Again, spoilers. The Tatyana Reincarnation. That is my biggest gripe with this book. So Tatyana is the woman that both Sergei and Strahd fell in love with long time ago. She was set to marry Sergei because she was head over heels for him, and Strahd's jealous rage is really what led to the he had darkness in his heart already, but what sealed the deal of his ascension to vampirism and led to the events that get us the module, and like Strahd becoming what he is and Barovia getting pulled into the mist and becoming the demiplane of dread that it is all because he wanted Tatyana for himself, and that's like his one true love, and blah 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 blah. So Tatyana's reincarnation is super, super vital to anything to do with a Ravenloft Barovian setting story, right? Whatever you want to do. Typically, when you play Curse of Strahd, Tatyana's soul is in Irina Koliana, and a lot of your story will end up being based around helping her along the way with the rest of your story that you're building. But Van Richten's Guide adds a lot of other options for if you don't want to use Irina Koliana, which can be very, very cool. The decision for her reincarnation in Heir of Strahd, I'm not the biggest fan of, and I have arguments for why it makes sense, but I just didn't prefer it. So one of the 5 party members that are lured into the mist, her name is Fiel, and she's an artificer. She worked in a tavern in, I think it was in Baldur's Gate. Sorry, it's been like a few weeks since I read it, so if I get some details wrong, I probably should have reviewed, but oh well. And she gets brought into the mist, and she's super sunshiny and nice and trying to see the bright side of this terrible situation the whole time, right? And as soon as they started describing Fiel that way, I clocked that, because those are like the main traits that we get about who Tatyana was. She was a breath of fresh air for Strahd, who was this disgruntled, weapon who felt like no one respected him anymore, who wasted his youth, and she was just the epitome of what youth can represent. And that was exactly how they were describing Fiel, and I went, uh-oh. And then Rahadin shows up, which I have complaints about Rahadin, but we're going to stay on this plot point first, and was immediately really, really kind and polite in almost like a servant way towards her, which he had no reason to act like that. He kissed her hand, he talked to her more politely, she was treated as the leader of the group, even though they all had just gotten there and they hadn't set up any sort of party dynamic yet. Treated her with reverence, and I went, uh-oh. And then of course at the castle it's slowly revealed that Strahd started feeding off of her, she's starting to not feel well, and he turns her. She turns into a vampire spawn. And the reason he does that is because by tasting through her blood, he knows that Tatyana's in there. Or at least it's heavily implied, even though Tatyana thinks that he doesn't know. Because why else would he have turned her that way? I don't hate the idea of a party member having Tatyana's soul. I think that could be a very interesting dynamic. I think if you're playing a D&D campaign, that takes a special kind of player, because that can lead into main character syndrome pretty easily. So it's something that could be fun and interesting and could make sense. And Viel's blonde, and obviously Tatyana is known for her red hair, and that's why Irina has red hair, and that's the big indicator physically of that's Tatyana, is if the character has red hair. Viel dyes her hair because she lives in the shadow of her sister who has beautiful red hair, and she's supposed to just be the ugly sister who makes sure that all the pyrotechnics are working for her bard shows and stuff like that, right? But yeah, I don't hate that aspect. That could have been interesting. What I didn't like is I feel like they crudely mischaracterized Tatyana. Because like I said, the main things we get to know about who she was, who this woman from the past was, is that she is a breath of fresh air. She's youthful, she's excited, she's bright and sunshiny and optimistic and just believes the best in everyone and everything. And she just felt like a very dark, twisted version of herself. Now this could be, like I said, there's some explanations here for that. Fiel ended up having quite a dark streak in her. Given the life that she grew up in, some of it was pretty understandable. It was very clear that she was in a very abusive family household, and she wanted, when she got a taste for power when she was turned to a vampire spawn, she wanted to get more and more power. She wanted to never feel as helpless and, in someone else's shadow ever again, and that. I get it. I guess you could also argue with Tatyana's soul reincarnating over and over again, because they did establish that she's been back several times in this novel, and this is just the newest reincarnation is in Fiel. We get that from Van Richten. Being in such a dark, dreary place, because Ravenloft, it's in the Shadowfell. It's dark, it's twisted, it's going to alter you. It's very hard to go into one of these places and come out with the same amount of you intact, the amount of your soul, amount of your morals. It's supposed to mess with you and make you do things that you never would have before and just fundamentally change who you are as a person. So the argument could be made that the reason Tatyana was also a darker version of herself and a little bit more twisted is because of how many times she's come back, and that's just kind of had a wear and tear on her soul. I could see that argument be made. Maybe Fiel's soul, because they were having a dual soul situation where Fiel didn't just have Tatyana's soul, she had her own soul and she had Tatyana with her as well. That maybe Fiel was actually such a dark person that her soul tainted Tatyana's, and that's the true reason why she was acting that way. I'm not sure. You could think about a lot, and I get that is fun to be able to speculate about why things are the way they are. But the way that Tatyana was written to speak, I just felt like it wasn't Tatyana. I felt more like that was maybe like Fiel's subconscious of like her darkness coming through, of like that grip for power, like I said. But it didn't read as Tatyana, and I didn't like that it was supposed to be her the way it was written, because this book doesn't have a lot of depth or a lot of like double meanings, or like you gotta think about it the way that like Heir of Strahd, the Memoirs of a Vampire by P.N. Elrod is. There's not a lot of questioning. It's very surface level. So I generally think that it was just supposed to be Tatyana, and that didn't feel like Tatyana to me. And that is my biggest gripe. I don't really like how they handled that, especially also within the end. Fiel and Tatyana are working together to defeat Strahd because they want to be free of him, because they recognize that as a vampire spawn, he has a level of control over her, and she wants to be free. Of course, like I've already said, Strahd has been promising that like he's gonna let her have more power, but he's trying to really vet that like she's who he's been looking for, his equal, his long lost love, that sort of thing that he can rule Barovia with for the rest of time. He hasn't ascended her to like the next step up from vampire spawn, right? And in the end, Fiel, with Piddlewick II, kind of showing her around to find some things that she might need that'll be helpful, attacks Strahd. Apparently with Van Richten as well, and we're gonna get to him because I have complaints about him as well. They defeat the three brides and Escher, which is wild, and when you come into the final scene with the rest of the party, it's just her against Strahd. And I'm just like, that was a wild setup. I don't know how we got there, like, level-wise, quote-unquote. Like, I get that it's a novel, but, like, it felt like it got way too... The difficulty just cranked up so high for people who didn't know what they were doing, and it didn't make any sense to me. Anyway, but she wants to kill Strahd so that she could take over and she could be the troll ruler, because she would be a beautiful countess, queen, whatever it was that she wanted to be, and no one could ever hurt her again, essentially. And the core party, the wizard, the paladin, cleric, and fighter? What? No, he was a barbarian. Their whole goal, the reason they go to Lamordia, is because if they can separate Tatyana from Fiel, they think they can save Fiel, even though they know that she's already been turned into a vampire spawn. Whatever. So they go to Lamordia to talk to Dr. Victra, do something for her in return for her creating something to separate the souls, which has never been done before, and she doesn't know if it's going to work, but of course they get a new corpse. They get the machine that's going to transfer the soul to the new corpse, and they're just like, yeah, of course this is going to work. Has this never been done before? No, but obviously it's going to work. But yeah, so they come in that final scene, witness that, and who Fiel has become, and it's this huge tragic scene of like she's truly given into the darkness, to the evil that is corrupting her as a vampire spawn, as an undead, and try to save her. And they manage to use the machine and separate the souls. And for a hot minute, they're describing it as if Fiel has been cured of her vampire spawnness, which I was like, what do you mean? She literally died for that. She literally died. How did you reverse that by just separating souls? Like, there's gotta be like a revivify situation, but like I think too much time has passed for a revivify to work, or like some sort of true resurrection. But like, that's not what they did. They just literally pressed a button on a machine and one soul went into the body, and leaving Fiel to her own thing. But they're like, no, she's fine, she's alive, she's good, everything's good, everything's back to normal. And Van Richten, with Larissa Snowmane, which another shout out to another Miss Wanderer expanding the universe, kind of lead them back to be able to go back to Baldur's Gate. And then they reveal in the end that, of course, Fiel was still a vampire spawn. I think she was a true vampire at that point, because Strahd was killed, so she was like free and had more powers. Tatyana's soul does go into the new body. She awoke terrified of Strahd, and that she was going to fall to him again. Van Richten was hoping that Strahd would be gone forever this time. Fiel tries to leave with Tatyana, but the Mists don't let her go because she's going to be tormented by the dark powers forever, just because she said no to a man hundreds and hundreds of years ago, which also hints at that Strahd's not truly gone, because why would they not let Tatyana go if he wasn't gonna return, sort of thing. But yeah, and then it gets revealed in the end that Fiel kills her family and is going to try to take over Baldur's Gate because she is still undead, she's still a vampire, and the party hasn't realized. So that's where I'm like, it could just be more Fiel, or did the curse of vampirism, did that alter her and just give into her darker feelings? I don't think that's true, because if she did something to her sister, she put something in her sister's tea that like fucked up her throat because she got madder. She had a dark, mean, evil streak already. So again, that's my biggest gripe. That's the thing I'm going to probably talk about the longest in this video. I don't really know if I like what they did with that. It was something different. It was something different. But there's just too many things about it that I didn't like. I guess the first thing I'm going to go into is Van Richten not realizing. Van Richten, who is a seasoned monster hunter, didn't realize that Fiel was still a vampire, was still undead, was still technically a monster. What the fuck are we doing here? What is he doing? Van Richten's characterization was put through the ringer. That was not Van Richten. That was not Rudolph Van Richten. There's lots of issues with that character in general, just in the lore, and like they've changed his lore just in 5th edition twice, as far as I'm aware. But him just being like a generic old man who has some knowledge to bestow, who is generally fairly friendly and cares, that wasn't correct. He's a grumpy old man who's trying to do his best to defeat monsters, to kill Strahd once and for all, because of the stuff that he's been through with vampires. He wants him gone, but he's not he's not mean, but like he's not supposed to be just like generically helpful. That's all he was. Like his whole character purpose in this book was just to further the plot and give the characters information, which I get that needed to happen, but like it just didn't feel like Van Richten. It could have been anyone who said these words. It didn't feel like Van Richten. It felt like they slapped their name onto it, like that plot device, because we would recognize that name. It would make sense for him to do it, but it didn't feel like it was written like that was Van Richten. But anyway, Fiel, like, he should have clocked that shit. He is a seasoned monster hunter. Like, the scariest thing about Van Richten is the fact that he's an old monster hunter. He is a survivor. He has seen shit. He knows how to deal with all kinds of terrible things that run throughout all of the domains of dread. Like, he has seen and dealt with so much, and to take that away from him and who he is like, that's another reason why I'm like, this wasn't Van Richten. It was just generically a helpful guy who knew things. Like, it didn't make any sense to me of like why he was made that way, other than they were trying to avoid like his more problematic stuff in his lore. Their solution was just to take away any flavor to him at all and make him tasteless and boring. I liked that he didn't know 100% if Strahd was gone, and we was like theorizing, and like he's still learning of like what needs to be done to finally free Barovia, right? And end this vampiric undeath tyranny. I did appreciate that, because that like leads the idea of like this cycle's still gonna continue, which is like a huge thing with Ravenloft, right? But him not knowing that she wasn't cured, you know, like, that didn't make any sense to me. That was stupid. The same way with, like, his friendship with Larissa Snowbane. I loved seeing the beautiful sea captain. She's gorgeous. I loved getting to see her. It was very brief, and I'm not as surprised that she didn't get as much time, but it was still cool to see the name. But him calling her, like, a really close friend, and telling them to, like, be like, tell her not to worry about me, but, like, she'll help you, blah, blah, blah. Like, the level of friendship that was supposed to be going on between them. Van Richten's curse. Did we also just delete that from the lore for this book? Because he doesn't get close. Like, he makes allies, and he helps people. And he's trying to do good in a world where good is impossible to achieve. But for him to act like they were such close friends, like, didn't make sense to me, because, like, that would be dooming her to die. Some horrible, like, I didn't... They threw so much out about Van Richten that, like, a lot of his interactions didn't make as much sense to me anymore. Okay, the next thing that I have a criticism about, I'm actually going to read you the description of someone's introduction, and then you're going to tell me who you think I'm describing. Because I guarantee you it's not who you think I'm describing, but here we go. It was a man, tall and sinewy, with pale skin and long black hair, powerful and haughty. The cut of his clothes suggested he was wealthy, possibly royal. He paused just outside the door. "Welcome, travelers," he said, his voice smooth and cultured, "to Barovia." That sounds like they're describing Strahd von Zarevich. And then we get a little bit suspicious of who we're talking about, but it was still, like, in the air, a possibility that could have been Strahd, but that was Rahadin. Rahadin, who is a brown-skinned dusk elf. But they described him almost the exact same way that Strahd is described. And I know why this happened. In the 5e module, when you get the physical description that you're supposed to read for your players, he is described as having brown skin. But then if you look at the art that is provided, he's very pale. And sometimes you just show a picture to your party instead. I don't know exactly what happened there, but there is a disconnect between Rahadin's identity as an elf of color, as a dusk elf, who are all described as having, like, brown skin, and the art that we get. And thus, I think Delilah just looked at the art and then described him. I know why it happened, but it's weird. I don't like it. I wish that we weren't whitewashing Rahadin. I think the fact that he is an elf of color, I think that adds a lot to the horrific story of his indoctrination into serving the von Zareviches and all of the colonialism that we kind of get with who von Zareviches... I'm sorry, what von Zareviches were doing before it becomes this gothic horror story, like who they were when they were alive, like, and King Barrow was still around. Like, there's obviously, manage your own mileage. Not every story needs to be told at certain tables. It depends on who your audience is, who's at the table, what everyone's okay with, that sort of thing. But in the base lore, there's a lot of this stuff that, like, I don't think should be ignored when we're just generally talking about it. And completely kind of making him just like a Strahd lookalike, not a fan. I feel like that takes away a lot of the things that makes Rahadin, and I don't like it. The rest of his characterization, I thought Rahadin had the weird, odd devotion stuff that we think of when we think of Rahadin and how he serves as a chamberlain in Castle Ravenloft. That was done well. I just didn't like that they described him physically the way that they did. But that is just an unfortunate curse of dealing with this particular franchise. Okay, I've been yapping for a while, so I think I'm gonna wrap that stuff. I want to talk about Lamordia and Dr. Victra before we get on out of here, before we depart for the mist. So I think once we get to that point of the story, the pacing gets a little off. And obviously the pacing changes throughout a book. Once you start getting towards the end, it starts picking up a little bit. That's fine. But figuring out, once you start getting to that point, because that's when they're really on the mission to save Fiel. Like I said, they go to Victra literally because she can probably make them something to separate the souls, like I've already explained. But the leveling of, like, how they go from bumbling first level feeling characters to what they end up with at the end, like the pacing where you get to Lamordia where they kind of would be leveling up. I'm thinking about this a little too much from a DM's perspective. It didn't add up for me personally because they were still fumbling so much when they were in Lamordia that, like, what they defeating Strahd in the end didn't make it, it didn't track for me personally. But anyway, Lamordia, I loved being able to see Ludendorff University, getting to interact with some of the characters there, and, like, how they view bodies and the flesh banks and stuff like that. Like, we got to, like, it was very surface level, just barely touching this, like, the surface of it, of what Lamordia is, but it was still very cool to see. I'm cautiously optimistic that maybe this could hint at we're going to get more Ravenloft novels, not just surrounding Strahd, but I'm not super hopeful for that, because it did just feel like we were getting a taste of where they could if this book was successful, but who's to say, not me. I didn't like, and this also kind of harkens back to like Strahd and how he talked, as there was so much telling and not showing. And I don't like that style of storytelling in books. I can see how that works for like a D&D campaign, if sometimes you just need to say things directly and that's fine. But in novels, if everything is just told to you so point blankly and not like shown for characters to come to their own conclusions or discover things, or just for the reader to understand the horrors of like the reality of what's happening, I find that really lazy. Because like Dr. Victor just like monologues her backstory about Elise and the unbreakable heart, and I just didn't care for that. If we didn't even get to that would have been fine for me, but like she just like drops it the same way Strahd just monologue drops his story, and I think he's a bit more of a monologuer. I think that makes more sense for his character, but like the way it was delivered just didn't sit right with me, because I just always see him as like he wants Tatyana, or who he perceives as Tatyana, to choose him more organically. So just dumping it the way that he did, I don't know. I feel like he's supposed to have more riz than that, than just, I mean, I don't know. I didn't like all the telling not showing. I feel like Dr. Victor Mordenheim, she did come off very scientific and aloof the way she's supposed to, but I feel like she gave away her true intentions too easily, which goes into like the whole like telling not showing stuff. I feel like we could have been left with a little bit more mystery about her, since she wasn't supposed to be the focus, but just like a tool to help figure the rest of it out. But it was fun to see her. I wish we had gotten more, but I'm okay with what we did get. Rapid fire end. Justice for the Brides. They literally introduce Anastasia and Lumilla as fucking wolves, and Strahd refers to them as his pets, which, like, hey, I think that is part of how he probably treats them. Like, he's not probably the greatest lover to anyone that's not going to be, I mean, not even to Tatyana, but like they're not who he actually wants, if that makes sense. We don't even get to see Valenta. Escher's barely there, and then they're just dead at the end, and that's how you know that Valenta was even a character. Like, I thought they were just gonna completely leave her out, but then she's just dead at the end. Wild. Piddlewick II, I liked him. He was cool. He was about what I expected. A little less murderous than I thought he would be, but I guess Fiel made a good friend out of him. I guess, like, in conclusion, I feel like this was a fun read. It was one of the better D&D novels, but it was not a Ravenloft novel. It was very surface level. It was all tell not show. If you like Ravenloft, if you like Heir of Strahd in particular, I think you could have fun reading this. But yeah, I gave it 3 stars. I'm glad that I did read it, but there was just a lot of things that I had too many critiques about, which probably doesn't help that I've read Heir of Strahd so many times, and that's just such a good book in general, let alone like the lore and the insights and the questions that it poses. It was just done so well, and that's just not that. I genuinely feel like this book was put out there as a cash grab. That they put the name Ravenloft and Heir of Strahd and all of these big characters in there because they knew that there would be drawn appeal because they're popular and people would want to read it. And then they didn't follow through well on their story or on like the big swings that they took with the choices that they made. It just was a bit of a letdown. It just felt like people will buy this because it's Strahd. And that's just a theory. That's just a book theory. Don't take that as law. And hey, companies gotta do what they gotta do. I guess I get it. But like, it just didn't feel like taking beloved characters and making art. It felt like taking beloved characters and making something that people would buy. And take that for what you will. But yeah, so I've been yapping for a while. I'm sorry, your wereraven guide likes to talk. I really wanted to make a shorter video about this, but here we are. I don't know how long this is gonna be, but we're at the end. One day, I'll be better about scripting and time management for these things. But hey, if you watch this whole thing, I would love to hear your thoughts about the book if you've read it or anything that I said. If you have any thoughts about why certain choices were made that maybe we can justify it a little bit more, I would love to hear any theories. I love talking about plots in books, especially when it has to do with Ravenloft and Strahd and whatnot. If you want to check out more of my stuff, I did do my last video was just me interviewing a bunch of Curse of Strahd DMs to see how similarly or differently that we all think about the setting, and we got a lot of insights and ideas and perspectives, just such a creative answers. It was I think it's a great resource, not to toot my own horn too much, but I think it's a great resource for anyone who is running the campaign who wants some extra ideas all in one video. As well as I have a podcast, Dark Lords and Dragons, that I make with my friend Natalie, always be plug-in, where we talk about Ravenloft lore in fun manners, and sometimes it's just me lore dumping because I love to do that. Again, a yapper through and through, every day of my life, even when I should shut up, I don't. We're at the end of this trip into the mist, so thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.